Hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Peter. It's good to see all of you again, good to speak to you all again in yet another video. It feels good that I'm consistently, trying to get some content out to all of you because, I'm enjoying this, so let's keep this going. Today, we are going to discuss this burgeoning scene of rock and post-punk bands in the UK. I feel like it's finally time to address this. We've been noticing that these bands are kind of taking over right now. So I think it's time to give them a bit of spotlight. It's time to discuss them at length. If you're a music fan of any kind, I'm sure you've heard of all of these bands by now, and if you haven't, I suggest that you start using the internet because it's a very useful resource. Who are these three bands, I hear you ask? Well, if it wasn't already obvious enough from the title of this video, the three bands we will talk about today are Black MIDI, Black Country New Road, and Squid. Squid's such a funny band name, right? I can see them rocking up to a gig where like no one knows who they are, and they're just like, yeah, what's up guys, we're Squid. I'm not really too sure why I made that observation, to be quite honest. There are much weirder band names than Squid out there, I think you'll find, but it's fine, let's get on with it. As a conglomerate of bands, I'm going to be referring to them as Black MIDI New Squid. Which I would take full credit for, but I think Fantano actually tweeted it out one time, so yeah, shout out to him, I guess. These bands are kind of leading the charge in this UK rock and post-punk revival, I guess you could call it. I don't really like calling it a revival though, because for something to be revived, it must first be dead or dying, and rock is far from dead. I've been saying this for years now, but just because rock is not the current zeitgeist, that does not mean that rock is dead. It's still very much alive and thriving. Anyway, let's talk about these bands then. I'm going to talk about Black MIDI first because I guess they're my favourite of the three. I think a lot of people were introduced to Black MIDI through that KEXP set that they did back in late 2018, early 2019, whenever it was. The way I found out about them personally was I found this Pitchfork article at one point. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember that they were saying like, oh, watch out for this band, Black MIDI, in the future. They're going to be something special. And I was like, okay, I'll take notes. And then a certain amount of months later, June 2019 came about, and I saw somewhere that Schlagenheim was released, which is Black MIDI's debut album, sitting right beside me there. When I saw that it was Black MIDI's album, I was like, ah! I know that name, I know that band name. That Pitchfork article I read a couple months back, I'm going to listen to this. And Schlagenheim ended up being a very experimental, raw and energetic blend of post-punk with math rock and noise rock. The band just showcased so much raw potential on Schlagenheim, and it actually ended up being my album of the year for 2019, if you didn't know already. I loved it, I loved the album to bits, and I still do love it, but there were these two live performances that they did, and as soon as I watched them, I immediately thought like, wow, this band can go further, they can do more, they can do better on their next album. You know what it was? It was the Pitchfork Music Festival from back in 2019 that they did, and also the Mercury Prize gig that they did last year. By the way, on the topic of the Mercury Prize, I am still salty that Dave won that Mercury Prize that year. I mean, he beat out Little Sims, Slow Tie, Idols, and Black MIDI. All four of them, who all had better albums than him that year. Come on, man. Come on. Shout out Dave, though. I do like Dave. Psychodrama was really good, so, fair play. Anyway, back to the point I was making. At both of those gigs that Black MIDI did, they played the song Boom 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 from Schlagenheim. If you know anything about the band's live performances, they tend to play their songs differently every time. If you go right to the end of both of these gigs that I'm talking about, links will be in the description by the way, you can see the band kind of momentarily break out into these really funky and jazzy riffs, and you just didn't get those kind of things on Schlagenheim. Yes, a couple seconds of a funky or a jazzy riff in a live performance was all it took for me to think, this band can be special and they can go on to drop something great with their next album. Was I wrong though? I don't think I was wrong, to be quite honest. If you haven't heard it already, this new album, Cavalcade, essentially sees the band lean very heavily into progressive rock and jazz fusion. But the thing is, they still maintain so much of that raw energy from Schlagenheim. They just kind of package it in a different way this time. This is exactly the kind of creative shift I foresaw Black MIDI making as early as 2019, I would say. And I don't want to take too much credit for their creative shift. I don't want to be like, oh, I knew it, but it was pretty obvious. There was such a talented band. They did so many great things on the first album. It was like, we know that they can push this even further. They really did abandon that wild, improvisational nature of Schlagenheim in favour of a more structured and layered approach on Cavalcade, and It panned out extremely well, great record. Go and check it out if you haven't already, please. Aside from Cavalcade though, you know what else has come out in 2021? Yeah, the Black Country New Road and the Squid albums that I'm still yet to mention. So let's go to those next. I'll talk about Black Country New Road first. If you're already familiar with this band, then you might have heard of them a few years ago when they dropped some singles that would later be reworked for the debut album. Those singles were Athens, France and Sunglasses. Clearly I just was not as quick to the plate as so many other people were. I only heard of BCNR like 2 or 3 months ago, a couple months after the release of For the First Time, which dropped in February this year. It's a great album though, and it sees the band hone in on this style of experimental rock and post-punk that at times can be very driving and very intense, but then at other times it's very breathtaking and it's very subtle. You can hear the obvious influence from a band like Slint. There's numerous passages on here that sound like updated takes on something from Spiderland, but then at the same time there are moments on here that remind me of like the Midwest emo scene of the late 90s and early 2000s, maybe American football. There's a very specific part towards the end of the song Athens, France. There's like a riff that they break out into that sounds exactly like something you would hear off of the debut American football album. But then on top of that, you throw on those jazz influences that all three of these bands just seem to have in spades, and it creates a very dynamic album from an instrumental standpoint. Let's also talk about Isaac Wood, the vocalist. My goodness, his style is so frantic, so energetic, so paranoid, and it's grown on me so much with repeat listens. I don't know if you guys will feel the same way about this, but I feel like sometimes I'm watching a play when I listen to this album because of how theatrical Isaac Wood's vocal style can make it. But I think that's just something that makes it so unique, and it makes this band such a standout group in this burgeoning scene. I just cannot wait to hear what they do next. I know this album's still very fresh, still very new, but I'm already looking forward to what they're doing next because of how much I'm loving this album. Also, I should probably mention, by the way, I think Black MIDI and Black Country New Road have actually worked together in the past, and I read somewhere, if I can find it, I'll put it in the description, but I'm pretty sure I read that Black MIDI have actually said there's probably going to be a collab album between these two bands in the future. Again, if I can find that, it will be in the description, but look forward to that because that sounds insane. And the final band that I want to give some spotlight to in this video is Squid. Now, Squid have actually been around longer than the other two bands, which is weird to think about since their debut album came out after the debuts of the other two, but you know, it's weird, whatever. They do operate in that same broad lane of post-punk as the other bands, but they kind of opt for a bit of a different musical direction, which I think is great. There's so much diversity in this scene. Squid seem to be very influenced by ambient music and krautrock, and you can hear these influences very clearly in some of the singles and EPs that they dropped prior to the album's release. Specifically 2019's Town Centre EP, which I gave a bit of a cursory listen to before recording this video. It's great, I would really recommend it. They continue to incorporate these influences into their debut album, this year's Bright Green Field. Of course, you have great songs on here that just feel like some classic post-punk, such as 2010 and Paddling, I hate that word so much. But then you do also have some grooves that call back to that 70s krautrock era, such as the tone-setting track GSK, which does give me like some serious Can vibes. The band does get loud and in your face at times on this album, but at other times, they play with ambience and texture and they subvert your expectations in the process. For example, the song Documentary Filmmaker, which sees the band build up to this very loud crescendo, but instead of just smashing the hell out of their instruments, they actually kind of reel it back in, and then the final portion of the song is just very subdued, contemplative, very ambient. You also have the track Boy Racers, where the band plays this pretty standard tune for about 3 minutes, but then they use the final 4 minutes of the song to create this very cavernous soundscape. And it sounds exactly like something that those experimental bands in the krautrock scene might have done at their own creative peaks. Ollie Judge, the lead vocalist of Squid, he does a pretty good job in this album. Me personally, I'm a fan of his vocal delivery. It's quite loud and eccentric and shouty at times. He very much reminds me of like a mix of Isaac Brock from Modest Mouse as well as James Murphy from LCD Sound System. Very weird mix, but I think he does it really well. I've heard some people say that his vocals are a bit derivative. Me personally, I don't feel that. I do feel the Isaac Brock influence is quite strong at times, but I love Isaac Brock. I think Ollie Judge puts his own kind of spin on it a little bit, so, you know, I'm not complaining. Come to think of it, that is something that very much unites all three of these bands, is that they've got a strange, eccentric lead vocalist. Obviously, Black MIDI has Geordie Greep, and I know he doesn't handle all the vocals. Some of those go to Cam Picton, but, you know, he still comes through with his crazy, wild energy at times. Not as much as on Schlagenheim, he kind of toned it back in for Cavalcade a bit, but still he has his moments. And then again, as previously mentioned, Black Country New Road has Isaac Wood, who is just so frantic, so paranoid, love the guy. And then obviously Ollie Judge from Squid can be very loud and frantic himself at a lot of times. So I think this is just something that unites these bands in a way, and just really speaks to their creativity, that they're really pushing on all fronts, including the vocal side of things. Bright Green Field is perhaps my least favourite of these three new albums, which is crazy to say because it's great, it's a great debut. It just says a lot about the quality of the music that these bands are delivering right now. Squid clearly have very wide musical palettes, and I think because of that, they can go in a variety of different directions moving forward. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how much of their potential they can tap into, because I think it's fair to say they've tapped into plenty of it already. Well, I think that pretty much does it. Oh, by the way, there are other bands in this UK post-punk and rock scene that I haven't mentioned in this video, but I'm aware that they exist, such as the band Shame, and I would have mentioned them in this video if I'd actually gotten around to listening to any of their music yet. And I know they dropped an album this year, so I will get on that very soon. Also, Dry Cleaning are another great band in this scene. I just recently listened to their debut album, New Long Leg, and it's great, one of my favourites of the year so far. But the reason I didn't mention them in this video is because I kind of wanted to highlight this more wild and experimental mould that Black MIDI, Black Country New Road and Squid fit into very well. I don't think Dry Cleaning really fit that as well. They're a bit more traditional instrumentally. But if you really like a lead vocalist who's funny, sarcastic, direct and deadpan, then that is exactly what Florence Shaw is. So I very much recommend that you listen to this album. Alright, thank you very much for watching this video. If you've made it this far, I do really appreciate you. If you enjoy watching or listening to me sitting here chatting about music, then do consider subscribing. And also, you know, a like and a comment on these videos seems to help out a lot with the algorithm and getting my video recommended to other people. So if you want to do that, feel free, that would be greatly appreciated. But otherwise, I will see you in the next video.